The Orioles picked up a couple of wins on deadline day on Tuesday.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It was pretty crazy. Now, the Orioles made their first move much earlier in the day, or their first move of the deadline, I should say. Obviously, they acquired Zach Eflin and Sir Anthony Dominguez on Friday ahead of the deadline. But their first deadline day move came earlier in the day, and they went and got Trevor Rogers, left-handed starter from the Marlins, sent Connor Newcomb and Kyle Stowers over to Miami in that deal. For a full breakdown of that trade, I did a live episode in the evening on Tuesday where I broke that trade down in full. So that would be the previous episode before this one in your feed. Make sure to go check that one out. I also live reacted on that show, though, to all the other moves that were pouring in. And that's what we're going to get to on this episode. A further look at all of those other moves that were pouring in on Tuesday. So let's start with the first one we got. This one came about 10 minutes before the 6 o'clock deadline on Tuesday and was fairly surprising because it was a right-handed hitting outfield bat, which we knew the Orioles were looking at. Now, they had gotten one in Christian Pache in the Dominguez for Hayes trade with the Phillies on Friday, but Pache not much of a hitter, so you knew they were still looking for one who could hit a little bit more, and that guy was Eloy Jimenez. That's right, Eloy Jimenez is a Baltimore Oriole. The 27-year-old, well, actually, he'll be later this year, he'll be 28, but 27-year-old right-handed hitting kind of DH/outfielder from the Chicago White Sox. The Orioles sent left-handed pitching prospect out of AAA Trey Mago over to Chicago, also agreed to pay the rest of his contract this year. It's only about $7 million in the deal. Now, Jimenez, first of all, if he hits well, and that's a big if right now with how his season's been going, but if he hits well, the Orioles can bring him back for a couple more years. Now, he signed a pretty team-friendly extension back in starting in the 2019 season. It ran through this year, but it also has 2 years of team options. So he has a $16.5 million team option for 2025 and an $18.5 million team option for 2026. So if he plays well, the O's can bring him back for at least 1 year and maybe even 2 more, but he'd have to play fairly well for the O's to commit $16 to $18 million to Eloy Jimenez. Otherwise, he is not the Eloy Jimenez we maybe remember from the past. He is not the Eloy Jimenez who came up in 2019 at age 22 with the White Sox and hit 31 home runs in 122 games. He's not the Eloy Jimenez who had a 138 WRC plus in the shortened 2020 season, or the 2022 Eloy Jimenez who hit 295, slugged 500, and had a 143 WRC plus that season. Not exactly the same player. Not even the guy who was a little bit above league average last year at the plate. He's the guy now who has certainly had some injuries and is just not having a good offensive season with the White Sox. He's played in only 65 games this year because he's had 2 different stints on the injured list. He had an adductor strain in April. He had a hamstring strain in May. And when he's been out there, really since then, it hasn't been great. 249 plate appearances this year for the White Sox. Eloy Jimenez has just an 80 WRC plus. He's hitting just 240 with a 297 on base and a 345 slugging, just 5 home runs. Now, a 7% walk rate is a little higher than we're used to from Jimenez, and an 18.9% strikeout rate is actually the lowest K rate of his career. So that's a good sign. He's chasing less, he's swinging and missing less, but he's hitting for far less power. Again, that slugging percentage, very much a career low at 345, almost 100 points lower than his second lowest, a 105 isolated power. He's just not driving the baseball in the air. So you're asking, okay, how does he go from at least at worst a slightly above league average hitter to a guy who's 20% worse than league average with the bat, despite the fact that when you look at his baseball savant page, like things look pretty good. Average exit velocity of 92.4 miles an hour. That's considered fairly elite. That is the best average EV of his entire career, including those amazing seasons he had, including the year when he ended up hitting 31 home runs. So that's pretty good. You also have a hard hit rate of 50.8%. That is the second highest of Jimenez's career. So you put that together and you're like, how did he end up with an 80 WRC plus? Well, Jimenez has always been a guy who hits the ball on the ground too much. Yeah, he hits the ball hard, but hits it into the ground. He had run like 50% ground ball rates. Not really what you want to do as a hitter, but he hit it so hard that they would still be base hits and he still hit enough balls in the air for home runs. This year, Jimenez has taken it to a different level. A 2.7 degree launch angle, that's pretty bad. That's a lot of grounders. A 60% ground ball rate is really, really bad. It is the third highest among players with at least 200 plate appearances this year. The only 2 guys with higher ground ball rates this season Harold Ramirez was DFA'd from the Rays because he was bad. And Tim Anderson basically was, before he was DFA'd, the worst hitter in Major League Baseball this year. So that's not great. So the Orioles have to find a way for him to hit the ball a little bit more in the air. And again, he's been good at 50%. It just can't be 60%. That's just like unplayable offensively to have a ground ball rate that bad. But he's hit lefties. He's hitting 304 against left-handed pitching this year. Can't really play the outfield anymore. Wasn't great out there last year. Only played 8 innings in the outfield this year, some due to injuries, some just because he's not great out there. But what's he going to be for the Orioles? Well, kind of a DH, maybe a little first base, maybe a little outfield, but mostly DH option against left-handed pitching. And the Orioles had said they were looking for another right-handed bat. They were kind of short one. Now, you could argue, isn't that Kobe Mayo's spot on the roster? And maybe it will be, but maybe eventually Mayo just takes Arias' spot, and you also have Jimenez as another right-handed hitter. It is certainly a possibility. But I do think not only can he just hit the ball in the air a little bit more, and because he hits the ball so hard and doesn't strike out a lot, he can be a lot better. I think he's going to be a lot better as a hitter. The other thing is, he came from a terrible situation in Chicago. Things can only get better if he starts playing for a good team. And the O's basically gave up close to nothing. Trey Mageau is their 37th ranked prospect in the system via Fangraphs. He was a left-handed pitcher who was taken in the 2022 minor league phase of the Rule 5 draft from Pittsburgh. He was recovering from Tommy John surgery, come back this year. 35 innings, does have a 2.08 ERA, but not a lot of strikeouts, a little bit of a walks issue. Fastball, slider, changeup guy, kind of projects, according to Fangraphs, as a reliever, but someone who wasn't really going to factor in to the Orioles bullpen here in 2024. So they don't give up much, and they get Eloy Jimenez, who could be a factor for this lineup down the stretch, like the move is kind of addition on the margins. But then they made another kind of weird move on the margins, and that was the Orioles acquired outfielder Austin Slater and infielder Livan Soto from the Cincinnati Reds for either cash or a player to be named later. That full return will be to be named later. Now, kind of a weird move because, okay, Austin Slater makes sense if you don't have Eloy Jimenez. Slater can play the outfield. He's actually been fairly okay defensively out there. He's played all 3 outfield positions, at least 50 innings between his time with the Giants and the Reds this year, and has even played some center field, which is what the Orioles really need, a right-handed hitting center fielder on this roster. And he has a career 122 WRC plus against left-handed pitching, always been a lefty masher, has good hard hit rates the last couple of seasons. So as a guy who in a vacuum would have made sense, but the Orioles had just 10 minutes prior picked up Eloy Jimenez and filled that role. So then you have Austin Slater, and that kind of doesn't make any sense. Now, with the Giants this year, he had kind of fallen off offensively. 78 WRC plus and 112 plate appearances, was DFA'd, sent to the Reds. He had 21 plate appearances with the Reds. He had only 2 hits. They were both singles. The Reds basically got rid of him as well. And you can essentially look at this as like a waiver claim pickup. That is the same thing with Livan Soto, an infielder who has spent a little bit of time in the big leagues over the past 3 years, but mostly in AAA. Soto was actually with the Orioles organization and in spring training with the O's at one point this year, then was DFA'd. They brought him back. Soto has options, so he has immediately been optioned to AAA Norfolk. He'll be like infield and shortstop depth for the O's at AAA, and you hope they don't need him at MLB, but just another infielder to have down there as they traded away some prospects. For Slater, I don't know, because Slater is a rental. He's a free agent after this year, but he's out of options. You can't just send him to AAA. So he's now on the 40-man roster, but it doesn't really make sense to have him and Jimenez. So I don't really know what they're going to do with Slater. He's like the one guy from this group where I'm just like, I got no idea. They might just DFA him immediately again, try to pass him through waivers and keep him in the organization. That's one thing they could do. I don't really know about that one, but maybe the O's got him before they got Jimenez and it was just reported in the wrong direction and they didn't think they could get Jimenez and then they got him. That's one thing that maybe could have happened. And then they'll just DFA Slater. That's kind of my prediction, but yeah, a little bit of a weird move. They did have to clear 40-man space for both of these guys. So Matt Crook, the left-handed reliever, was DFA, did make one appearance with the Orioles. Nasty stuff from the left side, but too many walks, kind of never put it together. And then Jorge Mateo was moved to the 60-day injured list, so he does not count currently towards the 40-man roster. That certainly is not good for his outlook with that elbow injury. That means he's going to be out for a more extended amount of time, and I wouldn't put it past him that Mateo might be done for the year with that gruesome-looking injury, but that did clear up space on the 40-man for the Orioles. And then that last really big-time big league move that the Orioles made was they got more bullpen help, and they went right back to the Phillies. So the O's acquired 2 starters this year. Both came from rebuilding teams, or at least teams that were sellers at the deadline, the Rays and the Marlins. And then they got 2 relievers. And those two relievers came from the team that is arguably the best team in Major League Baseball, the Philadelphia Phillies, who are trying to win a World Series. They got Seranthony Dominguez from them. And now they get Gregory Soto. Left-handed pitcher Gregory Soto comes to the Orioles in exchange for two right-handed pitching prospects, Seth Johnson and Moises Chase. Now, who is Gregory Soto, first of all? He is a 29-year-old left-handed pitcher who has been in the big league since 2019 with the Tigers and was an all-star out of the Tigers bullpen in 2021 and 22 as their closer, then was dealt to the Phillies that offseason, has been in Philly for 2 years. He was okay last year, threw in 69 games, had a 4.62 ERA. Underlying stats were much better, but he kind of faded down the stretch, and the Phillies barely used him in the postseason last year, was not kind of in the bullpen circle of trust, but he had a roster spot again this year, 43 games, 35 and a third innings for the Phillies this year, 4.08 ERA with a 3.61 FIP. Now, his 27% strikeout rate has actually gone up, some of the best one since his all-star days with Detroit, but also has a 12% walk rate, which is still the second lowest of his career, but is much higher than he had last year. The strikeouts and walks look more like they did when he was an all-star in Detroit, and so do the ground ball rates. 50% ground ball rate. That is really, really good from Gregory Soto, and that's because he is a big-time sinker guy. It's 41% sinkers. He throws it 97 to 98, but that sinker's been hit this year, 314 batting average against it. Still gets some ground balls, but there are a lot of hard hit ground balls. He's got a really good slider, though. Throws it 39% of the time, has a 48% swing and miss rate, and opponents are hitting just 194 against that slider from Gregory Soto. It's been an elite pitch this season. And, the overall ERA doesn't look great for Soto, but he's had some bad luck this year and last year. And, he throws really hard from the left side. Lefties have hit just 204 against him. He's been super tough on left-handed hitters this season. And honestly, he just had a really bad April. He's had a 3.04 ERA since May 1st. He's has a 2.84 ERA since June 1st. And the change he made in that time, he kind of went to the slider as his number one pitch. He threw a little bit less fastballs and went to more sliders. And that pitch has just been so good that he's turned himself into somewhat close to the elite reliever he was at multiple times in Detroit when he was an all-star. And that is a good sign for the Orioles as they bring him in. What will his role be in Baltimore? He's kind of a similar pitcher to Cionel Perez, but he's certainly a lefty upgrade if he pitches well over Keegan Aiken, and that makes the bullpen better. And hopefully the O's do get Danny Coulombe back at some point in September to be another good lefty, but he's also a just in case they don't get Coulombe back. He could be a high leverage lefty if he starts to pitch well. I do like the move, and hey, he also has team control, just like Dominguez, who's controlled through next year. Soto is also not a free agent until after 2025, so you can get him back into this bullpen to help the Orioles next season as well. Now, who do they send away? Two pitching prospects. The first is Seth Johnson, who came over to the O's in the Trey Mancini trade from the Astros in 2022, was a highly coveted, not from the Astros, from the Rays in 2022, was a highly coveted prospect back then, but the only reason the O's were able to get him for Mancini, he needed Tommy John surgery, and the O's knew that. They got him. They immediately put him under the knife, and he really didn't fully return until this season when he came to Double-A. And it'd been good, 65 innings, 2.63 ERA, much higher FIP, 23% strikeout rate, 13% walk rate, not great. He has been on the 40-man roster since November of 22 because he was Rule 5 eligible, but I don't think he's progressed as much as the O's have wanted this year. I think they would have wanted him to be at least in AAA at this point and kind of knocking on the door for a big league bullpen spot. That has not been the case, and it's hard to hold a guy on the 40-man roster who's in Double-A and not close to helping your big league team. So that's one of the reasons why I think they were looking to potentially deal him. Fangraphs has Johnson as the number 16th ranked prospect in the Orioles system. It's a good fastball, mid-90s, curveball, changeup, cutter. Projects as a reliever. It hurts to lose him. The O's had some eggs in that basket when they traded for him in the Mancini deal, but they did get Chase McDermott as well, and he seems to be a piece of the future. So they move on from Johnson, and they also move on from Moises Chase, who has really popped this year in Aberdeen for the Orioles. Number 24 Orioles prospect at Fangraphs, mid-90s fastball with great ride, slider, and changeup. 52 innings, 3.46 ERA, 34% strikeout rate with a 14% walk rate in Aberdeen this year. He's been great. That one might hurt even more than Johnson, but you got to give up some pitching to get some pitching, and the Orioles do that to get Gregory Soto.